Good morning. Now, it may come as a surprise, but in our 100-year history, ADL has never before convened a summit quite like this. This is a first. I suppose in our early days, it was because anti-Semitism was just a given. It's the reason why ADL was founded. And more recently, while anti-Semitism has been present under the surface of society, it was more like a persistent or nagging ache, a condition that you learned to live with and just tried to keep under control. We were vigilant, we monitored it, we spoke out against it, we fought back. But by and large, America and American life have been remarkably tolerant and welcoming to the Jewish people. The Jewish community lives here in this country with historic privilege and has achieved unprecedented success. And yet today, I think all of us fear that something has changed. There are troubling signs. Now, they may be subtle. They may go unnoticed by the vast majority of Americans, but we see them. We know. First, over the past few years, we've seen the growth of ugly campaigns on our college campuses. Efforts that seek to delegitimize the Jewish state and reduce Israel to some kind of taboo. This virus has spread and has made some of our greatest universities hostile to Jewish students, to pro-Israel advocates and those who support them. I could tell you stories right here about Stanford, Tufts, Columbia, Wesleyan, Hunter College, and so many others. At UCLA, a university where I taught for 8 years, the head of the Graduate Student Association, a young man who's not even Jewish, transferred to finish his law degree here in New York, rather than continue in Westwood to deal with the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel groups harassing him. And while many in this room might make the case for criminal justice reform and aspire to address racial inequities, all of us noted when some of the organizers of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer crafted a platform that singled out and slandered just one country in the world: Israel. This demonization caught many by surprise, but seemed to resurrect the rifts between the African American and Jewish communities that ADL and so many others have worked so hard and so long to repair. During this political season, we saw white supremacists use a triple parenthesis to target Jews online and simultaneously and relentlessly harass and intimidate journalists on social media with anti-Semitic tropes and horrific images of the Holocaust. These were conservative journalists. These were liberal journalists. These were print journalists. These were broadcast journalists. These were reporters. These were opinion writers. These were bloggers. These were mainstream media. They all had one thing in common. They were Jews. In short, the American Jewish community, our community, has not seen this level of anti-Semitism in mainstream political and public discourse since the 1930s. Sadly, it is only being matched with escalating levels of hate toward other minorities too, including Latinos, the disabled, Muslims, African Americans, and too often the LGBT community. In the days since the election, literally just over a week ago, reports of possible hate crimes such as physical attacks, vandalism, harassment have flooded ADL's local offices and streamed into the news. There has been a litany of incidents, and I am only going to share a few of them because time won't allow me to tell you them all. A black doll hanging from a rope in an elevator of a freshman dorm in Buffalo. Anti-gay threats left on the windshield of a car in North Carolina, or the hood of my former intern in Texas. Taunts at Latino students of Build the Wall at a middle school in Michigan. A young Muslim woman assaulted and her hijab yanked off her head on a street in San Diego. And yes, make no mistake, anti-Semitism has continued to proliferate as well. According to statistics released just this past Monday by the FBI, Jews suffer from hate crimes at a rate of more than twice that of any religion in the country. This week has been no exception. We've seen swastikas scrawled on a Philadelphia storefront, on a Jewish cemetery in New York, and in a public school in Maryland. Those Jewish journalists who were first harassed and terrorized online are now coming home to find mailings in their mailbox of harassment and threat from those same white supremacists. And the chief curator of a website that hosted many of the most hateful ideas of this so-called alt-right has now been appointed to a high post in government. What's the sum total of all these signs? People are afraid. I know it. I hear from them. They worry about their children. Many are asking themselves, are we safe? Well, we as a people invented the phrase never again. So let me just say here this morning, never is now. We must not be silent. We must raise our voices. We must act, and to act, we must understand what we are up against. We need to wrap our heads around the threats from the radical left that seek to delegitimize Jewish peoplehood and an extreme right that is embracing white nationalism and other racialist ideas that are hostile to American values and anti-Semitic at their core. We need to understand how technology is spreading these hatreds and becoming a weapon that threatens all of our communities. And that's what we're going to do here today. We've assembled an amazing lineup. There are activists and academics, executives and entrepreneurs, more than 1,000 people who will be here to listen, to learn, to take stock, and take action. I expect today will stimulate debate. You might agree with much of what you hear. You might disagree with even more. These ideas are intended to explore new angles to address this age-old issue. It is intended to get you thinking. It is intended to inspire all of us to action. More than 100 years ago, the founders of ADL came together in dark days at a time when American Jews were not able, and keep this in mind, we were not able to live, to work, or to learn anywhere that we wanted. It was a time when anti-Semitism was acceptable in public society, when a Jewish man could be lynched by a mob rather than tried by the law. Yes, there were days that were much darker here in this country than they are today. And at that most difficult moment, the founders of ADL said that we, American Jews, a group that lacked power, a group that had no real standing, whose future in this country was shaky and uncertain, they envisioned, the founders of ADL, that we would exert our power for good to stop the defamation of the Jewish people, even as we would stand up and pursue equal justice for all. Now more than ever, we need to honor that mission. We need to speak out when we see anti-Semitism and bigotry, no matter the source. Whether it's a publicly traded company or a high-ranking public official, whether it's what you hear from a progressive street protester or a conservative radio host, no one has an excuse for excusing intolerance. We need to educate where we can, oppose where we must, and lock arms with those who embrace our mission. And we must stand with our fellow Americans who may be singled out for how they look, where they're from, who they love, or how they pray.